Wapwn da, croeso mawr I chi gyd fel arfer. Today we conclude the latest 3-week review of coronavirus regulations here in Wales. Now, last week when I was here, I set out the latest modelling information which the Welsh Government has received about the likely course of coronavirus in Wales over the coming weeks. Today I want to begin by sharing some of the figures we have which show how the virus has actually progressed over the last 3 weeks. The last review, there were around 415 cases per 100,000 people. In the meantime, we've had many days when that figure has risen above 500 cases. Today, the rate is around 490 people for every 100,000 in the population. As you can see from the slide, across the 3 weeks, we have seen rises in the average number of hospital admissions for suspected and confirmed coronavirus. The demand on our hospital system has grown significantly. 450 hospital beds occupied on the 27th of August, 518 by the 16th of September. At the same time, pressure on critical care has risen, as you can see. And very sadly indeed, we are now seeing a rise in the number of people who are dying as a result of this cruel virus. On the chart that you can see in front of you, there are over 130 people who have lost their lives in those 4 weeks. 130 families who will never see or talk to their loved one again. If you are ever told that coronavirus is not a serious disease, that it can simply be avoided or neglected, think please, as I do today, of each one of those individuals and all those who are left dealing with their loss. Now you can see in that slide that the NHS remains under significant pressure. And once again, I say today that there are things that we can do to help our NHS. You can help by not going straight to A&E if you need assistance, but by using some of the other services which are available. Now, turning again to coronavirus and its likely course over the coming weeks. This week, the UK Scientific Committee, SAGE, has also published its advice. It suggests that up to 7,000 people a day in England could need hospital admission if the current progress of the disease continues unchecked. SAGE also made it clear that taking early action is the most effective way of containing the current wave of infection and minimising its impact on the health service. Sir Patrick Vallance, the UK government's chief scientific advisor, said in his advice to government, you have to go earlier than you think you want to, and you have to go harder than you think you want to. That is the advice that has been ringing in the ears of my cabinet colleagues this week as we come to our decisions. Those decisions begin with our conclusion that because vaccination continues to erode the relationship between falling ill and needing hospitalisation, we can keep Wales at alert level 0 for a further 3 weeks. But if we're going to be able to sustain that position into the autumn, there are 5 things that we need to do now. And these 5 things are all part of our conclusion at the end of this 3-week review. And the 5 things are, first of all, that we must get the vaccine booster campaign over the autumn off to as fast and as effective as a start as we can. Secondly, that we should move ahead and offer vaccination to 12 to 15-year-olds. Thirdly, that we have to reinforce the importance of working from home wherever that can be done successfully. Fourthly, that we must use the next 3 weeks to raise awareness and to enforce the law about wearing face coverings in identified indoor public places and on public transport. And finally, in the next 3 weeks, we will begin the process of introducing the COVID pass for high-risk areas. Now, I'll go through each one of these decisions in turn. The best way to protect ourselves remains by being vaccinated. So the first measure we will take is to press ahead with the autumn booster campaign. And in Wales, that campaign has begun already. It began yesterday with frontline staff in the health service in North Wales being the first to receive the booster vaccination. People living and working in care homes and frontline health and social care staff will be offered the booster as the programme is extended throughout Wales, and that will be happening over this weekend and into next week. Over the weeks ahead, the booster vaccination will be offered to everyone over 50 in Wales, all frontline health and social care staff, and all those aged over 16 who have underlying health conditions. Now, we'll wait for 6 months between people getting their last dose and the next one. But if you are offered, if you are called forward to receive the booster vaccination, please take it. It will provide you with essential further protection against coronavirus over this winter. And because of the importance of vaccination, the second measure that we are introducing over the next 3 weeks is to offer vaccination to all 12 to 15-year-olds in Wales. Now, letters will start to be issued to 12 to 15-year-olds from the start of next week. And those letters will invite 12 to 15-year-olds to come forward for vaccination. They'll be offered 1 dose of the Pfizer vaccine, and the invitations in those letters will call people forward from the 4th of October onwards. And that will give families the time they need to talk about vaccination and to make those individual decisions. We ourselves in the Welsh Government will redouble our efforts to encourage everyone who hasn't yet been vaccinated in Wales to come forward to do so. The slide you're about to see shows how successful our vaccination programme has been since it started less than a year ago in December 2020. It shows both first and second doses. The success you see on that screen is down to the hard work of those hundreds of people who have run our clinics, our mass vaccination centres, who've worked behind the scenes and in primary care. And it shows how positive people in Wales have been about vaccination. In most age and priority groups, more than 90% of people in Wales have already had 2 doses of the vaccine. But as you move down the slide and you move into those younger age groups, you will see that take-up has been lower and it has been slower. About 30% of 18 to 39-year-olds are still to be vaccinated in Wales. That's why we will redouble our efforts to ask those people to come forward and take the protection that vaccine provides. Amongst 16 and 17-year-olds, where we started vaccination this summer, we're making very good progress here in Wales, with nearly 70% already vaccinated. And as I've said many times in these press conferences and elsewhere, it's never too late to be vaccinated in Wales. It remains our best defence against this awful virus. There are, however, a number of measures beyond vaccination which we can take to help us to keep Wales safe and to keep Wales open. The third step we will take then in this 3-week cycle is to reinforce the importance of working from home. If you don't need to be in the office, for example, please work from home whenever you can. In England, working from home is part of their Plan B. Here in Wales, it's part of our Plan A, and it's in line with that advice that I refer to from SAGE, that we should build up our defences against the virus during the autumn and the winter as early as we can. That is why in a fourth set of measures, we will be stepping up awareness and enforcement of those other things that we still require in Wales which help to keep people safe. And that includes the rules that are there. They are legal, they are required rules about wearing face coverings in indoor public places such as shops and public transport. We will be working with those sectors to reinforce those messages. We will be working with our enforcement authorities to make sure that the rules in Wales are properly observed. Those are the rules that keep us safe. Those are the rules that help to keep Wales open. I want to turn now to the fifth and final measure that the Cabinet has agreed on for this 3-week review. We've been considering vaccine certification for some time now. Only allowing those people who can prove they have been fully vaccinated access to events and services raises a series of ethical, legal and technical questions, not least because it excludes all those who cannot be vaccinated. For those reasons, the Cabinet has decided not to introduce vaccine certification as a compulsory measure in Wales in this cycle. But we will be making the existing COVID pass compulsory for everyone attending high-risk venues. And the high-risk venues that will be covered by the need to display a COVID pass will be nightclubs and similar venues, indoor non-seated events for more than 50 people. That would include, for example, conventions and concerts. It will cover outdoor non-seated events for more than 4,000 people, and for any setting or event with more than 10,000 people, such as a rugby or a football match, in future, demonstrating that you have a COVID pass will become a necessary condition of admission. Now, the COVID pass confirms your vaccination status or that you have had a negative lateral flow test within the previous 48 hours. And in that way, the COVID pass is different to vaccine certification in a number of important ways. It allows people to demonstrate their COVID status in other ways than just through vaccination, because it also shows lateral flow test results. It is freely and widely available now and is already being used. And venues and events can easily read the COVID pass with technology that already exists and is available to them free of charge. The COVID pass system has been used by many festivals and concerts over the summer. It included the Green Man Festival here in Wales. And when Elbow and the Manics play at the Motorpoint in Cardiff this weekend, the audience will already know that they have been asked to show a COVID pass in order to gain entry. Now, we will make the use of the COVID pass compulsory in the high-risk venues that I've set out from the 11th of October. So we will use the next 3 weeks to work with venues and the events sector to prepare for its introduction, to give them the time they need to make it a success. And the reason that we are doing it is to avoid having to take any more intrusive measures to deal with coronavirus. We want to do everything we can now to keep Wales open and to keep Wales safe. These are examples of the measures that SAGE calls low-cost interventions. Interventions that if we take them now, we hope will be enough to prevent the need for tougher restrictions later on. To make this work, to keep Wales safe, to keep Wales open, we need everyone's help to bring coronavirus under control. Time and again, over the last 18 months, we have demonstrated that here in Wales, we can do it together and we can do it again now. Diolch o galon fel arfer I chi gyd. Time now to take questions from our journalist colleagues, and as ever, all answers will be broadcast on our own social media channels. First today, over to Adrian Masters at ITV Wales.
Thank you, First Minister, and you'll notice that I'm not in my usual location. I'm at a nightclub in Cardiff. I'm at the Philharmonic, actually in Cardiff. And part of the reason for being here is to talk to Nick Newman, who's the Group General Manager, and he's asked me to ask you more about on what basis have you made this decision? And the reason he's asked that is because they, as an industry, as a nighttime hospitality industry, feel that they have taken a lot of steps to be as safe as possible. And they are concerned that this decision sends out the message that they are not as safe as other sectors and other industries. What can you say to Nick and his colleagues?
Well, first thing I would say is to recognise all the hard work that has gone on in that sector, the steps that have already been taken. But nightclubs are unavoidably high-risk settings compared to other places. By their nature, people go to a nightclub to get close to other people. They are often places which, again, by their nature, aren't ventilated in a way that other settings are able to be. It is why, in the gradual reopening of Wales, as we moved down the alert levels during the spring, nightclubs were the very last places in Wales to be reopened. Despite the real efforts that the sector makes, it cannot be argued that nightclubs are not inherently and intrinsically higher risk venues than other places. Now, many such places already use the COVID pass, which is why we have decided, having listened carefully to what people said, to move to that at this point, rather than vaccine certification, as one further measure. COVID pass is already being there on the list of reasonable measures that such venues can take. To make them mandatory from the 11th of October just makes them that bit safer again and increases the chances that we'll be able to keep them open during the autumn and the winter.
Thank you. And can I ask you a question about, I suppose, the politics or the principles of this? You use the term COVID passes, but isn't it a vaccine passport by another name? And isn't there, or are you alert to the civil liberties risk that this could be the beginning of compulsory ID cards?
Well, the answer to your first part of that question, Adrian, is that they are clearly not vaccine passports, because you can get a COVID pass without being vaccinated. So it does avoid all those difficult ethical issues about people who cannot be vaccinated. those people can get a COVID pass because they can get through the testing regime. On your second point, I'm always myself acutely aware, and the Cabinet is always acutely aware of the civil liberties implications of everything we do. Nobody wants to intrude on people's liberties other than to the proportionate extent necessary to prevent other restrictions on people's lives. Just think of the slide that we started with today. Those people who every day are falling so ill that they need to be admitted to hospital. Those rising numbers of people who are dying from coronavirus in Wales. Those people have freedoms as well, and part of their freedom is to live in a society where collectively we take those reasonable measures to keep one another safe. That's what we are balancing all the time, and the balance we've struck today reflects our concerns for the liberties of individuals in that civil liberty sense, but also those wider liberties to go about our lives free from the risks of this awful disease. Adrian, thank you very much. Over to Hugh Thomas at BBC Wales.
Prynawn da, os allech chi ateb y cwestiwn yn Gymraeg ac yn Saesneg, os gwelwch yn dda. When did you decide that you perhaps wouldn't stomach a full-blown vaccine passport? And why wait to introduce the pass until the middle of October when your own modelling suggests that cases will be in decline by then?
Well, we made, oedden ni'n, fel Cabinet, ni wedi cwrdd 4 waith yn ystod yr wythnos diwetha, ac oedd y penderfyniad ola ddim wedi cael ei gynnig tan prynhawn ddoe, dydd Iau. Achos fel ni wedi trial i ddangos, mae'n penderfyniad anodd, a mae'n rhaid i ni wneud mewn ffordd ofalus a trial i feddwl trwyddo popeth ni wedi esbonio prynhawn yma. Ni'n aros tan yr 11 o Hydref i roi cyfle i'r sector i paratoi. Dros cyfnod o coronavirus i gyd, pan ni'n newid y reoliadau, ni wedi clywed oddi wrth y sectorau, rhaid iddyn nhw cael amser i paratoi am rhywbeth ble ni ddim nawr jyst yn ymgynghori rhywbeth, ond ni'n wneud rhywbeth yn angen reidiol. Mae lot o'r digwyddiadau yn defnyddio'r y Covid pass nawr, a maen nhw'n gallu bod ymlaen i wneud hynny, a mae mwy o bobl yn gallu defnyddio'r pass nawr, ond ni ddim yn mynd i wneud yn angenreidiol tan yr 11 i roi cyfle i'r sector i roi popeth yn ei le. So the Cabinet has met on 4 separate occasions over the last week to think through all the many considerations that we've already touched on today. These are difficult and closely balanced decisions, and it was right that we took the time we needed to think through every aspect of it. The final decision was made yesterday afternoon when we had final advice on a number of the issues that lie behind today's decisions. The reason for not implementing on a compulsory basis the COVID pass in high-risk areas until the 11th of October is to give the sector time to prepare. Whenever we've changed the rules in the whole history of coronavirus, we've always had appeals from sectors to give them the time they need to make the necessary preparation. Many high-risk venues already use the COVID pass, as I've explained. I think there's an event in Cynhadledd today where COVID passes will be being used by the Royal Welsh Show in order to get access to that event. So people can use it now, people can use it in advance of the 11th of October, but to give people proper opportunity to put everything properly in place, we will give 3 weeks for those preparations to be carried out.
Thank you. And could I ask you about the pressure on the NHS at the moment? You've outlined where some of that lies, and people working in the system are telling us at the moment about the unprecedented levels of pressure they're facing. Will you now ask the military to help to reduce ambulance response times, as is happening in Scotland? And do you accept that more elective treatments will be postponed, and those record waiting times that we hear every month are going to get longer as the autumn and winter kicks in?
Wel, mae'n wir I ddweud, mae pwysau ar gwasanaeth iechyd genedlaethol a hyn o bryd yw un fawr iawn, achos mae'r system yn trili delio gyda'r nifer o pethau ar yr un amser. Delio gyda'r Covid, delio gyda'r raglen brechu, delio gyda'r raglen flu, delio gyda'r nifer fawr o'r bobl sy'n dod I fewn i'r system fel achosion brys ac yn trial ac yr un amser I mynd yn ôl I wneud pethau oedd yr NHS yn wneud bob dydd cyn y pandemig yn digwydd. So fel dwi wedi dweud heddi, mae lot o bethau ni'n gallu wneud fel unigolion I helpu, a mae fwy o pethau allwn ni wneud yn y gwasanaeth iechyd hefyd. Ni'n trafod pethau gyda'r byddin trwy'r pandemig. Ni wedi cael help fawr oddi wrth nhw, a os bydd o rhaid I ni ofyn iddyn nhw am fwy o help, wel, mae popeth yna I le I wneud hynny. Mae diwysiadau I wneud bob dydd gyda'r bobl sy'n redeg ar NHS yn bob cwr o Gymru, pan maen nhw'n trial I delio gyda'r popeth maen nhw'n eisiau wneud. Ni wedi weld yn barod, mae rai bobl wedi tynnu nôl ar rai o'r triniaethau, ond maen nhw weddus I mynd nôl I cario mlaen dan nhw pan mae'n posib I wneud e. Well, it's absolutely true that the health service is under huge current pressure, and it's under pressure from all sorts of reasons and sources. Coronavirus, with the numbers that you saw earlier, with running the vaccination campaigns, with dealing with the flu programme that we'll be asking them to carry out over the autumn, with a very high number of people who are presenting as emergency cases direct to hospital. As I said earlier and last week, there are things we can all do ourselves to think about that and to try to help, and of course by the enormous effort to restore the non-coronavirus treatments that were affected earlier in the pandemic. We've had very regular and very significant help from the armed forces during the pandemic, and if we need to ask for further help from them, then the path to do that is well understood, and those lines of communication are always open. In some parts of Wales, health boards have already had to pull back from some planned surgery in order to balance all the other things they're being asked to do, but that is a temporary measure when they do so, and they are anxious always to get back to trying to provide those more regular and routine treatments as soon as conditions allow. But it's going to be a difficult and continuing balancing act right through the winter. Huw, diolch yn fawr. Over to Will Hayward at Wales Online.
Thank you, First Minister. We saw in France, where you needed to be jabbed to go for meals out or the cinema, there was a huge upturn in vaccination after the rules came in. You've told us that 30% of 18 to 39-year-olds have yet to be fully vaccinated. How will a COVID pass that allows you to simply use a lateral flow test encourage them to get jabbed? And if this isn't about encouraging people to get jabbed, how much do you expect insisting on lateral flow tests to reduce the spread of COVID?
Well, it's not primarily a measure to improve vaccination, but I hope it will have that effect as well. It is primarily a public health defence measure. The position in France and Wales are not comparable, well, I don't believe, because our levels of vaccination are so much higher than they were in France when those measures were introduced. And while there is still a way to go in getting enough people in those earlier age groups to come forward, those figures are going up, every day. Now, if the COVID pass regime persuades more people that the quickest and easiest way to get the pass where you don't have to worry about lateral flow tests every time you want to go somewhere, is to get vaccinated, all well and good. And I'd absolutely encourage people to do that, because when you've got your vaccines, the pass is guaranteed and there's nothing else that you will need to do. So if it does persuade more people to come forward, then that will be, a very good thing. If people choose not to or haven't been able to, then they will be able to use the testing regime in its place. People, I think, are very used to lateral flow devices. They're used extensively in our schools regime, in our care home regime, and many of us will have used them in our own lives when we need to be able to make sure that we are safe from the virus. And the reliance on it, it's the second line of defence in the COVID pass. Vaccination is the first line. I think is one that we can make work effectively in Wales.
Sorry, hopefully not a persistent cough. Are you concerned about people simply cheating these tests? You don't actually need to even do a lateral flow test to register them for a COVID pass. Given how easily it is to report them without actually doing it, is this really going to make a noticeable difference on the infection rate in exchange for the massive amount of bureaucracy it's going to make for many businesses?
It doesn't, I think, mean a massive amount of bureaucracy for businesses. As we said, many businesses operate it every day now, and they're able to accommodate it very successfully. And it's one of the reasons we chose the COVID pass at this point, is because the systems are already there, freely available to businesses at no charge to them. Am I concerned that there may be misuse of lateral flow tests? Well, of course we are right to be concerned about that. But I rely on the fact that the long history of coronavirus in Wales, the vast majority of people are people who want to help, who want to do the right thing, who want to be sure that they are playing their part in keeping themselves safe and other people safe too. We will consider over the next few days whether or not to introduce a specific offence of knowingly and deliberately falsifying a COVID pass. So that if there are people who think that this is just an easy ride and that they can just invent results, then they may find that there are significant consequences for them in doing so.
So would that be the same as if you give false information to track and trace, a similar line as that?
I certainly have forgotten, and even you may have forgotten a bit, but if you need to show an ID pass to go into a pub to show that you're 18, it's an offence to falsify the evidence that you provide to do so. So there are parallel regimes that we can draw on if we decide that the risk of people falsifying it is so significant that we need to have a specific regime for it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Will. Draw I Lydia Griffiths, S4C.
Diolch, Prif Weinidog. Mi fydd plant rhwng 12 a 15 yn derbyn dos o'r brechlyn ddechrau fis nesaf, a mae pobl ifanc rhwng 16 a 17 eisoes wedi derbyn y brechlyn. Felly pam peidio gwneud y pas Covid yn arfodol iddyn nhw, ac ydy hynny yn benderfyniad terfynol?
Wel, mae popeth ni'n neud, ni'n cadw popeth dan ein llygaid ni, a fel ni wedi newid pethau ar diwedd y trydydd wythnos presennol, ni'n mynd i feddwl am fwy o bethau dros y tair wythnos sydd i ddod. Dyn ni ddim yn mynd i wneud pas Covid yn orfodol i bobl ifanc, achos dydyn nhw ddim yn yr un sefyllfa a hyn o bryd o bobl eraill. A mae pethau eraill ni'n gwybod hefyd am y risg sydd da bobl ifanc. So a hyn o bryd dyn ni ddim yn mynd i wneud e'n orfodol, ond ni'n cadw popeth dan ein llygaid dros y cyfnod a dros y tair wythnos nesaf. Lydia asking me whether and why we are not going to make the COVID pass compulsory for people under the age of 18 and whether we are keeping that under review. I answered by saying we do keep it under review. We keep everything under review. It's how we've changed the rules in Wales at the end of this 3 weeks, and we will be thinking over the coming 3 weeks of whether there are any other measures of the same sort, those low-cost measures, as Sage refers to them, that we could take now that would help us to keep Wales open and to keep Wales safe over the winter and autumn that is ahead. With younger people, they haven't been able to access vaccination as others over the same period of time. There are other arguments as to why they should be excluded from it. We'll keep all of that under review as well.
Diolch I chi. Dych chi'n sôn yn eich cyflwyniad heddiw bod chi'n bwriadu cynyddu camau I orfodi masgiau mewn mannau dan do a thrafnidiaeth gyhoeddus. Be mae hyn yn feddwl yn ymarferol a be fydd y newid o heddiw ymlaen sydd ddim yn digwydd eisoes?
Wel, ni eisiau mynd nôl a pobl sy'n redeg y system trafnidiaeth a pobl sy'n gyfrifol am archfachniodd, just I weld os mae nhw'n gallu wneud. So pan chi'n mynd ar y tren, ni'n hyderus pan chi'n dod mewn I Gymru, chi'n clywed rhywbeth sy'n dod ato chi I ddweud, chi wedi dod I fewn I Gymru, wisgo masg yn y cyd-destun ar y tren, mae'n orfodol I chi. Os mwy ni'n gallu wneud, just I cael y negeseuon drostodd I bobl I bod yn glir da nhw, and ni'n siarad gyda'r trafnidiaeth I Gymru, pobl sy'n redeg y bysiau ac yn y blaen, I wneud fwy I cael y neges drostodd yn y cyd-destun na. Gyda'r archfachniodd, os mwy mae nhw'n gallu wneud, negeseuon dros y tannoedd, jyst I atgoffa bobl, mae'n angenreidiol I chi defnyddio mwgawdau pan chi'n siopa fan hyn. Os mae pethau I ddangos pan chi'n mynd I fewn i'r archfachnod, rhywbeth sydd yna I ddweud, I dod I fewn fan hyn, mae rhaid I chi defnyddio mwgawdau. So fwy o negeseuon I bod yn glir da bobl am y gyfraith yma yng Nghymru, a mwy ni'n gallu wneud trwy bobl sy'n gweithio yn yr awdurdodau lleol, enghraifft, I mynd ar ôl sefyllfa ble ni'n weld pobl sydd ddim wedi cymryd y neges na yn barod.
Felly, ydych chi'n derbyn bod pobl heb fod yn ddilyn y rheola felly?
Wel, popeth ni'n clywed oddi wrth bobl sy'n mas na yn y maes yw y mwyafrif fawr o bobl yng Nghymru yn dal I wneud beth ni'n ofyn iddyn nhw I wneud. A popeth eraill ni'n cael, ni'n wneud ymchwil bob wythnos a I ofyn I bobl, ydych chi'n cario ymlaen I defnyddio mwgawdau pan mae bobl yn dod yn ôl, y mwyafrif fawr o bobl yn dweud ie, a mae nhw'n eisiau weld pobl eraill wneud yr un peth. Ond chi yn gallu weld pan chi'n mas ar y gwmpas, rai pobl sydd ddim yn wneud hynny. Dyna pam ni'n eisiau cryfhau y negeseuon a cryfhau jyst I bod yn glir gyda bobl, y gyfraith yng Nghymru yw I defnyddio mwgawdau yn y cyd-destun na. So, Lydia just asking me about the compulsory use of face coverings in those settings we've identified in Wales, what we are going to do to reinforce that message, and are we doing it because we are worried that more people are not observing the law in Wales. So on that final point, I just explained that the evidence we have from enforcement authorities, and we do collect that information from them every week, is that the considerable majority of people in Wales continue to follow the law. Every week we do research into people's own attitudes on a whole range of things to do with coronavirus. We always ask a question, are you wearing a mask yourself on public transport when you're out shopping? And the answer comes back from the considerable majority of people, yes, I do, and I expect other people to do the same. So while when you're out and about yourself, you do see examples of people not following the rules, it is against a background of the significant majority of people still doing it and expecting others. So what we will do is we will ask people who run our trains or buses or supermarkets to reinforce that message, making sure that if you're on the train, for example, and you're coming into Wales, there's an announcement on the tannoy that tells you you are in Wales, wearing a face covering on public transport is compulsory here. We want to talk to our supermarket colleagues. Can they do more announcements over the tannoy to remind people, if you're shopping here, you've got to wear a mask? Could we have more signs at the front entrance of supermarkets, more prominently, reminding people, if you're coming in here, you've got to wear a mask before you do so? So part of our effort is about just making sure people know the message, and then we will work with our enforcement colleagues in local authorities in particular to see what more can be done where there are instances where the law in Wales is not being observed. Lydia, diolch yn fawr. Over to Dan Wilson at LBC.
Thank you, First Minister. The leader of the Welsh Conservatives said today that he wanted you to bring forward your revelations for a winter plan for the NHS, something Boris Johnson did earlier this week. When can we expect that from you? And do you accept that that is a matter of urgency, given the fact that One Health Board, Betsy Cadwallader, told me this week that the pressure on them was so high that it was inevitable that further restrictions would be implemented over the winter?
Well, we've announced further restrictions today. I'm not sure where the leader of the opposition has been, because we have a plan and we've published it already. Our alert level control plan is there for anybody to see. It shows exactly how, if we needed to do so, we would move back up the 5 levels of restriction here in Wales. We're at alert level 0 at the moment, and the plan sets out how we would have to move through 1, 2, 3, and finally, in the much to be hoped we never get there eventuality, right up at alert level 4. We have regularly published updates on the plan, and we do plan to publish a further update of the control plan following today's announcements. But in Wales, we didn't need to have a new separate winter control plan because we've had that plan there in the public domain for many, many months.
Thank you. And on the subject of international travel, the UK government are widely expected to announce big changes to that today, the scrapping of the traffic light system and potentially the scrapping of the requirement for fully vaccinated travellers to test before and after they get home. If that is the case, if they do proceed with that, where does that leave the Welsh Government? Surely in a position, isn't it, where you have to follow suit, given up until recently you had to scrap the differing requirements for which PCR tests were used in the first place?
Well, I think there's a lot of material in that very hypothetical question, Dan, because neither you nor I have actually seen what is being proposed by the UK government. Let me deal with your final point first. We required people in Wales to use an NHS PCR test up until the point that we were satisfied that the private providers would be providers that would provide a proper service and a service that would accurately report the results of tests into the Welsh NHS. The UK government had to take 91 providers off the list it originally published because it was demonstrable that they weren't able to provide a service of the sort that was required, despite the fact that thousands of people would have used them because they were on the UK government's approved list. Because the Markets Authority has now published its report, cleaned up the performance of private providers, now we're satisfied that they are operating to a standard that Welsh citizens can rely on. That's why we made the decision, and it was a decision that was entirely for us to make. We will wait to see what the UK government has to say on foreign travel. We've always urged them to take a more precautionary approach than they have so far. When they amend their lists, it is very difficult for us not to follow because most people who travel from Wales travel from airports and seaports outside Wales. But the testing regime, in exactly the way that the final part of your question demonstrated, is something for us to decide. We'll wait to see what is proposed by the UK government for England, and then we'll decide on what we think offers the best public health protection to people here in Wales. Dan, thank you very much indeed. Over to Rod Minchin at PA.
Good afternoon, First Minister. You said earlier that younger people have been slower to take up the offer of a vaccination compared with other age groups. So are you not punishing younger people by introducing COVID passes, as they are more likely to be attending nightclubs and large events?
I don't regard it as a punishment. to put something in place that will help those young people to stay safe, and through them to help other people to stay safe as well.
Okay. If people who are fully vaccinated can still be asymptomatic for coronavirus, why is having a COVID pass necessary?
It's a good point you make, Rob, because neither vaccination nor a pass is a magic bullet. You know, being vaccinated does provide you with significant advantages to yourself and to others, and it does make you less likely to transmit the virus asymptomatically to other people. But it doesn't stop it from happening, and nor does it stop you contracting coronavirus. So we're not introducing the COVID pass on the basis that it magically removes all the risk. What it does is lower the risk, add to the repertoire of things that we are doing in Wales to try to reduce the risk, because everything we do in that way, every little thing we do, makes its contribution, and collectively it adds up to the things that SAGE said we should be doing, and that we should be doing them now. So, you know, not for minutes suggesting to anybody that a COVID pass is somehow going to eliminate all the risks that you will face in going to high-risk venues. It will be another defence alongside all the other things, as we heard earlier, that those settings are already doing to try to make them as safe as possible. Rod, thank you very much indeed. To Steve Bagnall at the Daily Post.
Thank you, First Minister. The Nighttime Industries Association Wales Commission has said introducing a COVID pass would have a hugely detrimental impact on the nightclub sector. Do you disagree with that assessment, or do you accept there could be a negative impact?
I do disagree with that assessment. The whole purpose of it is to keep that sector open. If we have to move back up the alert levels in our control plan, if we move from level 0 to level 1, at level 1, nightclubs are closed. So, you know, they were the last to reopen, and they might be the first to have to close. The reason we are taking the measures we are today is to help to keep them open. They're there to help, not to be an obstructive measure in the path of the industry. And I think many, many people in the industry who use the COVID pass already will regard it in that way.
Thank you, Minister. Are you concerned the COVID pass scheme will be difficult to police? A person could show a photo of any passcode on their phone, get way through because there is a large queue to process. Will door staff be required to have, say, a barcode scanner system to check?
The system that front door staff need exists already, and it's available as an NHS app, and it's free for them to use. It will be in use in the Motorpoint Arena in Cardiff today, over this weekend, and in Llandegwydd in Mid Wales today at the Royal Welsh Shows event. So, yes, there will be systems. Can you design a system that people are deliberately and knowingly setting out to evade? Well, you can't. But in the enforcement regime, as I said before, we will consider whether there should be a specific offence, you know, with criminal justice consequences for people who put themselves in that position. Steve, thank you very much indeed. Over to Andrew Nuttall at The Leader.
Minister, so with these vaccine passports obviously being introduced in Wales, the vaccine passes, sorry, but obviously in England there won't be a solid alternative. How will it work in areas like North Wales, which share a border with England?
Andrew, whenever we have something different in Wales and different in England, then people have to find a way of navigating that, and by and large have learned to do it very successfully. Just remind everybody that the UK government has not abandoned the idea of vaccine certification. They were, as you know, up to a week ago, still saying it was going to be going ahead immediately. They still intend to publish the regulations for vaccine certification. They say that if they need to move to Plan B, they will introduce it. So different decisions are made on in different parts of the United Kingdom. Border issues are always there to be resolved. I don't think this one is difficult because there will be many venues in England that are already using the COVID pass.
Thank you. And do you see these measures that you've announced today as enough to prevent any sort of further lockdown measures in the future? And do you believe that going forward with this 5-step plan that it is achievable, that the people of Wales can do this?
Well, the whole reason for taking these measures and taking them early is, as I've said, to keep Wales safe and to keep Wales open. The best advice we have from our own scientists and from SAGE is that by taking these sorts of measures now, we maximise the chance that we will not need to do more to contain the virus in the future. But we will continue to prepare in case we face an even more difficult winter from coronavirus than we currently predict. So I am confident that these measures will help. I am confident that they will play a part in keeping us all safe and keeping businesses open. But as ever in the Welsh Government, we prepare for all eventualities, and if more measures had to be taken, then we would not shy away from them if they were necessary to protect the health and well-being of people in Wales. Andrew, thank you very much. Thank you very much to you all. Diolch yn fawr.